Jay, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for asking, and thank you for having me on your program.
Hey, you're welcome. And it's actually a surprise live session that none of my audience actually knows about. We had this agreement with you because your schedule is very interesting as you will describe to our audience in just a bit. And just for those of you who are tuning in right now, I'm super honored and privileged to be having on the show, I would say, one of the leading authorities worldwide when it comes to the area of productivity. Personally, myself, doing a lot of work in this area, I've been super inspired by the work of Jay and Gary. And Jay, why don't you introduce yourself? What do you do? What have you been doing? And what brought you to where you are today?
Okay, that's three questions. I'll see if I can track all of them. So currently, I am Vice President of Learning at Keller Williams Realty. We're the largest real estate company in the world by agent count. We have about 190,000 associates in 50 countries. Gary started, my partner and co-author, Gary Keller, started the company back in 1983 here in Austin, Texas. And I joined a little over 20 years ago in 2000. Back then, there were 6,700 agents. So I've seen a lot of growth with the company over the years. We truly became international. And I get the privilege of every day working with our publishing team. We have a course writing team that is in the Training Magazine Hall of Fame. We've been a leader in training and personal development for a long time from a corporate standpoint. And I also lead our video team. Among the other hats I get to wear, and we'll talk about this because I'm sure a lot of your audience has multiple hats, right? I'm a father and a husband. Those are my first two. I've been married to my wife, Wendy, for 21 years. She runs our real estate team that's in 3 cities called the Papasan Properties Group. It's one of, I think, the top 150 real estate teams in our network. And she's a great business person and has her own podcast. And we have 2 kids. Our son, Gus, is 16, and our daughter, Veronica, is 15. So we are right in the middle of the teenage parenting years. That takes a fair amount of energy, and I can't imagine them being gone. I also own a publishing company with Gary that we use to create the books and hold the intellectual property. I've been a partner in a private equity enterprise with him as well. And I've got a few other ventures that it's just me investing my money. But my wife and I are real estate investors, and we also invest in businesses. So that's a lot. I'll throw it out to you. That's where we are today. And how I got here is I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee. I've always loved books. That was my escape. I read fantasy novels and science fiction novels. It was all about being an awkward teenager, and that was the place I went. But I loved the written word. And some of my early English teachers said that I had some talent. And so I got an English degree. And I was telling you, I lived in France for about 3 years as a translator. I also got a French degree. And then I went to New York University and got a master's in writing, and then got a job in publishing at HarperCollins Publishers, where I worked for about 6 years. Got to edit some really good books while I was there and learn the book craft, right? Not just writing fiction, but I learned nonfiction and self-help. And I learned that I could love that I could really enjoy the creative energy of solving problems. And I met my wife there, and then we got married, went backpacking for 5 months all over Europe and North Africa. And then on a lark, moved to Austin without jobs. And it was just a few months later that I got a job at Keller Williams. So I'm watching the clock. I think that was 3 minutes, which is longer than an elevator speech, but that's kind of as tightly as I can wrap it up, 20 plus years.
So it sounds like you're busy with a couple of things.
I am, but in a good way. I'm one of those people. I love having a quiet weekend. I love to read a book. That's my favorite thing. I love to lose myself in a book or a good movie, walk the dog, fly fish. But I also, when I'm at work, I want to be busy. I hate being bored at work. If I'm busy and I'm engaged, the work goes quickly and I come home fulfilled. I do not like being bored.
Yeah, and the first time I came across your name was obviously by purchasing a copy of The One Thing, the book that I want to explore in depth today as well, which, by the way, for the audience, have sold more than 2 million copies and has been a major book in the area of productivity and personal leadership. But I'm curious, how did you actually decide to write a book about focus and productivity? What I love about your profile, as opposed to many personal development gurus, so to say, is that you're coming from the world of business. You've been there. You and your co-author, you guys are doing stuff. It's not like let's write a book and put some theories there, but it's actually stuff that you applied and you tried. And so how did you guys decided let's write a book about productivity after the few books that you wrote about other topics?
Yeah, we've mostly were writing about real estate and real estate investing. So the origin story for the book goes like this. It was probably 2008 or 9. I should probably memorize the date. I know that we worked for about 4.5 years on the book before we published it. But I was running the learning department then as well. And we had just completed a course. And so I don't know if what real estate sales are like there. I believe you're in Copenhagen, you're in Denmark. It's different all around the world, but it's a small service business, right? That's the one thing that everywhere you go in the world, these people are independent business people. And while there's great opportunity, it's very tough. And we wrote a course on, in 1 year, how to build your business big enough that you could hire your first full-time employee. And that's a big milestone for a small business owner, right? They go from being a solopreneur to having a team. And it's also a gut check. Do I feel confident in my business that I can bring someone in on salary, not a freelancer? I'm bringing in an actual employee, and they're going to be counting on me for their livelihood. And so it was a fun course to write. It was something that many agents aspire to in their business. And we spent about 6 months writing it. And I gave it to Gary to review. He loved it. And he said, I want to write an introduction. I'd like to write something kind of edgy and fun to really inspire them to lean into this. And he spent the weekend and he came back with a 10 or a 14-page essay. I have it boxed up. It was all written out by hand. He had he'd written it, and it was called The Power of One. And I read that, and it was a lot of the principles in the book, the idea of time blocking and figuring out what your most important priority was, and then attacking it with vigor. And he said, Jay, when I was writing this, I kind of thought this might be a book. And I was like, yes. I'd worked in publishing. I'd been an editor, and all of Gary's success, he is a brilliant visionary. I mean, he is often considered the Steve Jobs. And I put that in quotes because that can mean a lot of things to a lot of people, but he's a visionary in our industry. He saw things and built models that no one else did. And the thing that really distinguishes him isn't that he's really bright or that he works really hard or any of those things. It's that he's always made his practice to figure out what the number one priority is. And then when he knows what that is, he'll give that more time and resources than anyone else in the organization is willing to, because he knows how important the one thing is. And it's like actually a joke, Stoyan. It's a joke. If you go into a meeting with Gary and there's 5 agenda items, if you're not number 1 or 2, we're not talking about you. Because we'll spend half the meeting talking about the number 1 priority. And then we'll start talking about the number 2 priority. And inevitably, about 20 minutes into that, he'll go, wait, let's go back to number 1. And because he lives it. And so as someone who has helped publish books before, I felt like this was perfectly concentric. This is his superpower. This is something he lived. And so we came together. We wrote the outline for the book. It was all an hypothesis. This is what he believed. This is how I've been living my life. And then we hired 2 full-time researchers. And that's when we spent the good 4.5 years trying to validate it with science and experience. We interviewed top performers in many fields and profiled top businesses. And we were looking for what they all had in common. And it's like a pyramid. The closer you get to the top of the pile, the more things the top performers have in common. And it's really crazy. Across industries, you see the commonality. And that was really the genesis of the book. It started with an essay that I felt like put us in 100% integrity. It's how Gary lives his life. It's how we run this business. It's how he taught me to be a business person instead of an editor, right? And so that's the origin story of how 2 real estate coaches and teachers, business people came to write what I hope is going to be a long-lasting kind of title in the realm of productivity.
The one thing, and for the audience, actually, those people who come across this concept in this book for the first time, what is the one thing? How can we apply the one thing in our business, in our life?
It's a great question. So the basic premise, like if I'm giving people, we call them cliff notes, because when I was a kid and you had a book report for school, they sold these little things called cliff notes. It was a summary of the book, and everybody bought those instead of reading the book. So here's the cliff notes. It's not difficult. It's not complicated. The subtitle in English is "The Surprisingly Simple Truth Behind Extraordinary Results." And so it's actually very simple in terms of how you do it. It's just not easy. I just think we have to always make that distinction. Something can be simple and also be very difficult. Complicated, on the other hand, is always difficult because people can do complicated in a short sprint, but they can't live it as a lifestyle. We're just not made as human beings to do that. So the simple approach is, at the heart of the book, we have a thing called the focusing question. And it's a little long, so maybe you can put it in the podcast notes or transcribe it for them. But it's, what is the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else is easier or unnecessary? So it's a very specific question. And we really believed in it so much. If you look at the American edition, we didn't put anything on the back cover but a question mark, because we knew the number one thing we wanted people to do after reading our book was to ask that question for their life, for their business, for their marriage, for their health, whatever the area is. So it's, what's the one thing, not 10 things. What's the one thing I can do, not would, could, or should? A lot of people, I hear them saying, what's the one thing I could do? No. Because could may not be something you're currently able to do. We want people to focus on what they're currently able to do. And then such that by doing it, all it says is that there's not going to be a one-to-one. Everything else is going to get easier or necessary. So you're looking for the biggest lever, the biggest leveraged action you can take today to take you towards your goals. And when we wrote that, Gary had been using it in his coaching sessions for many years. I personally was scared. I was like, wow, what if people don't know the answer? What if they ask the question and they're like, I don't know? And what I'm delighted to report, having taught the book to literally tens of thousands of people, is the vast majority, and I mean like 98%, do know the answer. If they stop and pause their life, their busy, hectic lives, and ask the question, most people are very clear about what they should be doing. And they often feel a little guilty that they're not doing it, but they don't feel like they have control. They don't feel that they're caught up in this torrent of modern life where they have all of these opportunities to spend their time. I mean, I can pick up my phone and watch a brand new movie today. I can do so many things that I couldn't do when I was a kid. I can't imagine the distractions. I mean, would Einstein, have done what he did if he had an iPhone or not? I don't know. The distractions are enormous. And then there's also the obligations. We have our work. We have our children. I don't know about you. I'm at that age where I have aging parents. So we have many, many things on our to-do list, and it becomes very hard for us to identify what's the real priority right now. So the first step is to ask the question and then to listen to your answer. A lot of people don't trust it. They think, well, how can I be sure? You don't have to go hire a coach to do this. Trust your answer. And then the next big step, and this is really, it's only 2, maybe 3 steps at most, is you time block your answer. We call it time blocking because it's one of the simplest ways to manage yourself. In my time, we started this at 9 a.m. So I don't know about you, but my phone, 15 minutes before the hour, vibrated and I saw a little message, right? Prepare for the podcast. And so I've already been trained, right? I've been well trained by technology that I have a cue that tells me my next task and I can shift my focus. So what you do is you figure out, this is my one thing. Let's just say I'm an author. I need to write my book. My next task is to go to my calendar and say, when am I going to do it? and I'm going to block big chunks of time, 2 to 4 hours. And we can go down this path if you want. I'm going to tell people just go ahead and do it in the morning, early, while you have focus and energy. You're going to block that time. That's step number 2. And what we found, the simple act of putting it on your calendar makes people about 3 times more likely to do it. I'm going to say that again. Just that act. Here's what I'm going to do. Now I'm going to go and I'm going to create space on my calendar to do it. You go from 33% likely to do it to 91% likely to do it. So it's very effective, very simple. Now here's the difficult part. The third step is you have to protect your calendar. And so you have to keep other people and other priorities at bay so that you can go live your calendar. When I talk to the most successful people in the world, one of the phrases that came up a lot is, my calendar is my boss. I get up in the morning and I listen to my boss and I do what my boss tells me to do. Because they know that if they can follow, especially in the morning, they have their morning rituals, like their health, they meditate, they journal, all those things that they built these powerful habits around. And then they go to work and they knock out their one thing. The afternoon, you can be incredibly undisciplined if you just did that one thing in the morning. And I'll tell you, like, I worked out this morning. I had to get up at 5:30 to do it. I do it, with my wife. She's out of town right now. But we work out with a trainer virtually. God bless COVID for that, because it opened up the world to having trainers, really world-class trainers, just zoom into our home. So we're able to work out. And I can tell you, at lunch today, I'm going to feel kind of righteous because I knew that the number one thing I could do for my health, I did it already, right? So that burden is lifted. So it's 3 steps. We ask the question to identify our priority. We go to our calendar and we make time to do our priority. And then we protect that time so we can live our calendar. So that's simple. But boy, if you've been living the book, you can probably testify. It's not always easy, is it?
Jay, thank you so much for this extensive description of this. Yes, this question has been having such an impact on me and my life, and the way I structure my priorities and my time. I have no idea how many times I get back to this question, because it's so simple. It's just, I'm lost with all these things. I feel overwhelmed, and I'm a really, really disciplined when it comes to productivity, about time management, about these things. But slowly you kind of get off track sometimes. Yeah. And then it's like, what's the one thing? What I love about this as well is you can ask this question for, what's the one thing in my relationship? What's the one thing in my business? What's the one thing in my health? And maybe you can elaborate a little bit on how often should we ask this question?
So I love that you brought that up. That was one of my big ahas about this. It's an approach, right? It's an approach to life. It's an approach to work. And if you learn the habits of living the one thing, you can aim them at whatever's important to you. So I am answering your question, believe it or not. I think that I would tell people the question is very powerful and you could use it everywhere if you want, but I try to use it around anything that represents a big commitment or something that's truly important to me. So the only page in the American edition that I have memorized is page 114. And I don't know what it is in your copy. And is it Danish? Am I getting that right? No.
English. No, it's
you have the English, the American. Okay, good. So maybe you have the yellow cover edition where I have the white cover. But it's page 114. And there's 7 circles. And Gary and I, we thought about this. We said, what are the areas of our life that we truly don't want to fail in, right? Where failing would give us really regrets on our deathbed. We would be asking, wow, I wish I had, instead of I'm glad I did. And so for us, it started at 12 o'clock with what's the one thing for my spiritual life, right? If we don't decide why we're here, we're kind of postponing a big question. And that can be religious if you're religious, or it could be something bigger or smaller, right? It's their spiritual life. But we think it starts with that, the grand scheme. Why am I here? What's the one thing for my physical health? And physical health is important because if you're going to do extraordinary things, you're going to need energy. And we see this violated again and again by people who are very successful, but they neglect their body. They neglect their diet. And over time, they're borrowing against an account that will eventually get called due, right? We see that. And we think that, oh, maybe top performance means I will lose my health. That's not true. It doesn't have to, but you have to ask the question and build powerful habits there. The third priority for us, and this is just the way we lined them up, was what's the one thing for my personal life, right? Because ultimately, the things that we do just for us, that's self-care. I'm not talking about getting a massage once a quarter or going to the spa, right? That's therapeutic, but do you have a hobby? Like for me, it's reading. I like to go fly fishing. I like to go, I actually love exercising with my wife has become a hobby now. Walking the dog. Those are things that I do that give me energy, right? Instead of taking energy, I feel filled up when I'm done. And I get a lot of pushback, Stoyan, especially from working parents. You know, if you're a single parent, they're like, whoa, the first three are all about me. What about my kids? And if you've ever sat on an airplane and they do that spiel, a lot of times we don't listen to it at all. But they'll tell you if the airbags deploy, right, the masks deploy, and you're sitting by a child, do you put the mask on the child first or on yourself first?
Definitely on yourself.
Right, because if you don't put it on, you might pass out before you can help the child. You might both die. And so it's not selfish, but if you don't do self-care, you may look up one day and you won't have the energy, the health, or just the fortitude left to take care of the people you love most. So a dose of self-care is important. The fourth priority is your key relationships. For me, that starts with my wife and my kids, and then extends to my family and my friends. But it's different for everyone. But I'm going to ask the question, what's the one thing I can do for those relationships? Then it's our job, right? You have a job. Even if you're a business owner, you have a primary role in that business. And then you have, what's the one thing for my business? And this confuses people. Job and business, what's the difference? Your job is your role. Your business is where you work. Even if you own it, do you know what the one thing that drives your business is? And ideally, as an employee in someone else's business, you should take the time to figure out how your job contributes to the overall success of the enterprise, because that line, like how you building a widget makes the whole company better, is ultimately your path to success. And it's probably how you win with your boss, right? Look, boss, I made the most widgets, and therefore our division is going to be number one in contributing to the top line revenue, whatever that is. So what's your job role? What's the business one thing? And then last is finances. I frankly think if you had those other circles in order, you're going to be happy with what you're getting, because you're going to be performing at a high level and probably be highly prized. But we also know, especially with couples, the number one reason they fight and quarrel is over money. So what's the one thing I can do for my financial health? So those were the 7 areas that we thought that people should probably make a practice once a year of asking that question. And my wife and I do. We go on a retreat every year. We set our goals for the next 5 years, and then specifically for the next year. And we ask questions around all of those circles. You know, in 2021, what's our one thing for our physical health? And for our key relationships, we'll break it down. What's the one thing for us with Gus? For us with Veronica? Gus is preparing to go to college. So right now, when we answered that question, we have to go and visit colleges, right? So he gets a sense of where he might want to go. So that's kind of how it works for us. If it's big and important, I think that this approach will really serve you well.
I really love the fact that you personally define what are the areas that matter most to me, right? Because for me, they might be different. For somebody else, they might be different. But what are those things that matter most to me? And am I intentionally making progress and focusing, paying attention to these areas based on the things that I said as priorities? And I remember I watched I think a webinar that you did somewhere on YouTube where you speak about the GPS.
Yes.
What is GPS when it comes to goal setting? Maybe we can explore this a little bit.
Sure. And can I want to say one thing, because I just shared 7 things. And I can remember I gave a speech to the MBA group at SMU University. And it was actually their graduate MBA program. So these are all very accomplished business people. And one lady was a senior partner in a law firm. And she pretty blatantly said, I don't think your book works. I asked the question in all 7 areas, and it all fell apart in like 30 days. And I just asked her, I said, were you trying to do all 7 things at once? And she said, yes. And I was like, it's not called the 7 things, it's called the one thing, right? I wasn't trying to be a smart aleck, but a lot of people make that mistake. They see what their priority is, and then they want to do it all at once. So I just want to encourage people, one of the core ideas, and you figure out what your one thing is, you go time block it, but what we encourage people to do is go build a habit of success around that area. And on average, the science says that could take as long as 66 days to cement a habit, a lot longer sometimes, right? But focus on that one thing until you feel like, wow, this is like second nature now. Like I remember when I was, training myself to wake up earlier. You start setting an alarm and 2 alarms, and you're trying to get up a little earlier so you can get more done. And at some point, your body just starts waking up naturally, right? We're trained. We can do that. So that's kind of how we navigate through the 7 circles, just one at a time, figure out which one's your most important and pursue that. So I'm sorry, I digressed. With that said, I'll talk about the GPS. The GPS is a 1-page business plan. And it's good for anything that is a big endeavor that has a lot of moving parts. And the goal here is to get you or your team all on one page. A lot of people write a business plan, and it's a slide deck that's 30 long, and like they have to go do the pitch. That's good for getting financing. If I want to get someone to invest in my company, go do a pitch deck. If I want to get a bank to loan me money, go write that kind of business plan. But something to take action, right? This whole point of this, can we keep it simple? The GPS is a process where you identify what's our one singular goal. And you write it, right? I want to make $100,000 this year. Great. That's very specific, and it's time stamped, right? It's going to be this year, $100,000. That's the G, the goal. The P stands for priorities. And we allow people, most of the time it's 3, but as many as 5 in big corporations, 3 to 5 priorities. And the way you do it, Stoyan, is you would say, well, to make $100,000, if I could only do one thing, right? What's the one thing we could prioritize as a company such that by you just walk through that question, and that becomes your number 1. And that goes in the number 1 slot. And let's just say that's we'll double our marketing efforts, right? Blah, 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 blah. And then you say, great, if we nail our number 1, what would be our number 2 priority? And then you write that out. And then the third one, it's not the and is not there. It's if we nail number 1 and we nail number 2 and we still have time and resources, what do we do for number 3? And you work your way through it. And sometimes in like FedEx and these big corporations, it can be a longer list. So you have your 3 priorities, right? One goal, the top 3 priorities for achieving it. Now, under each priority, the S stands for strategies. What are our 4 or 5 strategies? Same prioritization. If we can only take one approach, right, for doubling our marketing efforts, what would that be? Well, let's use social media. Great. If we nail that, what's the number 2? Well, let's do, we're going to do canvassing. We're going to go and prospect for meeting with business owners in our immediate neighborhood, whatever that is. I'm just making stuff up here, Stoyan. But you would come up with as many as 5 priorities. So at the end of the day, you've got one goal, maybe 3 priorities. They each have 4 or 5 strategies under them. If you're a business of 1, there's your game plan. More likely you have a team. Maybe you have contractors. Maybe you have a big business. The last step for us usually is assigning responsibility. So as the business owner, I'm going to own the goal. I'm going to coordinate the team to make sure we're all doing what we need to do. And I may own a priority too in a small business. But I'm going to ask, so who is the person who should own our number one priority? All right, Samantha, that's yours. And then I would like you, Samantha, to walk through the 5 strategies that we've identified and put different team members in charge of each one. That's how things happen at once, because Samantha has her one thing and each of her team members has a one thing, and they can then give that thing a lot of focus and we come out of the gates. So I'm going to give you a working example. If you look at our most recent podcast, and because I have no idea when someone's going to listen to this, I'm going to look it up. I was listening to this morning, episode 293. And Jeff Woods, my partner in the training business, he worked with the individual at FedEx that designs the software that allows them to load all of the packages on the planes so that the planes fly straight and don't crash, right? Incredibly important software. And they had a goal of making the paperless cockpit, right? They wanted to make it 100% electronic. No guys standing on the tarmac with notebooks writing things down and doing calculations about where the weight should go. It was going to be 100% electronic. They had this as a top priority for over 6 years and made no progress. 6 years. Jeff introduced him to the idea of a GPS. He sat down with his team. They looked at all of their competing priorities, identified their number one as the paperless cockpit. They completed that task that had been sitting for over 6 years in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And he goes, it's amazing when you're really clear what you have to say yes to, it gets really easy to say no to everything else. That's the beauty. And it's all on one piece of paper, right? Everybody, you can put it on the wall. Everybody on the team knows what the priorities are, who's in charge of the priorities, and how they work together. Because so much of what we do in big companies, we don't really understand how we're connected. So it's a business plan that is really favors action. And it also it brings a lot of clarity to the team about how we work together.
Jay,
so does that help?
This is golden, first of all. But I wanted to ask you: is there this resource, this one pager? Can people find this on your webpage or somewhere?
Yes. If you go to theonething.com with the number one, look at you, ready to go. Thank you. If you go to theonething.com and then go to the training tab, we have like a free video on how to do a GPS that you can walk, and Jeff will walk you through. Here's how to do it. And we have forms there for you. You could download the form. I love it if you do, and get on our email list. But frankly, just get a piece of paper. What's our one goal? Get on a whiteboard, right? I did this in a tech company in San Francisco where we had a divisional leader and they'd been struggling to communicate their priorities. And I said, let's just go to the whiteboard. What do you think your one? And in 30 minutes, we had a GPS. Everybody on the team was clear. She sent that to her boss, an executive VP. And this is like a Fortune 50 company. And because it was so simple, so clear, he signed off on it 30 minutes later. Said, this is awesome. Let's do it. So it's not complicated. It's not easy, right? You still have to go do the work. And
Right.
you have to say no to all the distractions to get that job done. But the results, it's addictive. Once you figure this out, it's very addictive.
And it reminds me, I had a guest on the podcast, and Grace there gave, probably he read the book and he's been impacted also by your work. But what he does, he's a consultant and he often works with executives, with leaders. And when he does a workshop, one of the things he almost always does is he sits with them and says, okay, guys, let's do an exercise. Let's ask everybody from the senior team, what do they think is the number one priority for the year, for the quarter? Okay. They ask it, and the executives are usually shocked to see that nobody gets it right. Nobody knows.
No.
So the first thing, really, this is golden, the advice. Guys, the listeners, the audience, this is golden. This is so simple, but it just really work wonders. Getting really clear, what is the goal? What are the priorities? What are the strategies? Who's the responsible person for each of this? Are we aligned around it? Everybody's clear around this? Is that in a place that will not just stay there, but actually be revisited? But I think the other part, and I would love you if you can get deeper into this, is how do we resist the temptation to go and do something else once we set those priorities in this GPS? And I think this is what many people struggle with. Like, we have those priorities, but then again, oh, there's so much stuff to do. I need to do this and this, and I'll get back to the main thing. Like, so
Yeah.
how do we stay on track?
It's tough. That's the protecting your commitment to your one thing is the hardest part of the journey. And Gary told me a long time ago, I've been working with him since I was like 30, right? So, I mean, I've grown up in this organization. I've almost worked here half of my life now. You look up, and he just said, the thing to understand about success is that it can be very boring, and you have to make peace with that. So much of what we do is about seeking novelty, new things. We call them shiny objects, especially entrepreneurs. There's always a new idea. And the challenge with jumping to a new idea is that day one with a new concept or strategy, you're as dumb as you can be. You just have no experience. You don't have much intelligence around it. It's just a new idea. And that is fun and exciting for people that are built that way. But the challenge is you're also operationally at your worst. But if you choose the path of mastery by leaning into that thing that truly makes you competitive, what'll happen is for a period of time, there's kind of like a gulf you go through. You go through this dip where it's like, oh, I'm doing the same thing again. Oh, I'm doing the same thing again. It's like a diet, right? Oh, I just want a dessert. Oh, I just want a glass of wine, whatever that is. But then you get to the other side and someone will say, wow, Stoyan, you've lost weight. What are you doing? You start to get the rewards. If you can make it through that boredom, right? And it really is the boredom of extraordinary success. You start to see the changes in you and your business. And that is where you get the tailwind. So I think the number one thing is there's an element of faith, and stick with it. It's about 10 weeks to get through 66 days to form a habit. Give yourself the permission to just say no to things for 10 weeks. Everything's not going to go to hell in a handbasket in your business, right? You can neglect things a lot longer than you think. But focus on this. It's not 100% of every day. It's just a few hours a day you're giving to it. Give it that focus in the first of the day and lean into it. And then truly you can see the results. That's where I think people get addicted to this process. I'll give you a couple of other strategies. If you did this and you identified this as your number one priority, a question I like to ask people, Stoyan, I'll say, why is this important? And they'll say, oh, if we do this, right, we'll hit all of our quarterly goals and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that's awesome. Great. You'll get a bonus. You might get a new car. That's great. What will happen if you fail? And if there's no response, I often will say, then the stakes aren't high enough. Because if there's no cost of failure, it's aspirational. And we tend to give up, right? We tend to give up a lot easier when there's no pain at quitting, right? And so if there is a cost, I'm in the home business. You'll say, why are you moving? Oh, we really want to go to New York City. Awesome. Well, what will happen if you fail to sell your home? Well, our son isn't going to Juilliard. He won't be able to attend. And then you see, oh, there's the motivation. So I think that it's very important, really be really clear what you're saying yes to, and be really clear of the cost of failure. This executive at FedEx that I mentioned earlier, what he understood, he said, our number one priority is safety. If we are successful at this, we will eliminate human error from all of these decisions and make our pilots and our crews safer around the world. And so he understood the cost of failure could be a human life, and yet it had languished forever. So get really clear. Clarity is so important. Generality kills clarity, and a lack of clarity kills action and motivation. So get really clear, and also allow yourself to entertain what's the cost of failure? Who will you disappoint? And then work on that. I usually try to trick people into extra motivation. Get a peer partner. right? If you really want to start going to the gym, commit to do it with someone. Because if you have to get up at 6 a.m. and go to the gym and it's just you, you'll hit the snooze button. But if you know that Stoyan is waiting for you there, you're like, I want to go back to sleep, but I don't want to disappoint him. The cost of failure now is losing the respect of a friend, right? I had a friend I was working out with that never showed up with me. And I got angry. I was mad at this guy. I was like, I cannot believe I'm here by myself again. Like, why are you calling yourself my partner? Right? So find ways to bring a cost to it if there isn't one, if you know it's important. So there's a couple of techniques, but we could teach a class for an hour on how to adhere to this. But be very clear, it can be boring because it can be that if you're doing the same thing again and again, and you haven't yet made the leap forward to results and mastery, it won't feel fun for a period of time, but it is called work, right? It's okay.
I love it. And one thing that you mentioned briefly at the beginning and then afterwards again, but I think it's very important for people to hear more in detail is you said that you and I know that Gary is also doing the same thing, is you allocate your mornings to work on the thing that you want to focus on. Like, why is that the case? And maybe if you can give us a overview also, how do you bring those priorities into your day-to-day? Like, when do you plan? How do you plan your day-to-day?
Sure. I won't go too far in the weeds because we only have about 10 minutes left. But here's the thing. When you interview the most successful people in the world, there's some research I read that millionaires get up on average 3 hours before everybody else. And I remember I read that, and it was a throwaway little, like it was just a little footnote in this study on millionaires. And I was like, oh, I know why they do that. The morning hours, right? Even if you are an owl, not a lark, if you love to stay up late, morning is when you get up every day, right? So if you get up at noon every day, that's your morning. If you get up at 6 a.m. every day, that's your morning. When we wake up, we tend to have the most mental energy, right? Overnight while we sleep, literally we store glycogen in our system, and your brain uses more of that than anything else to focus. And so when you make decisions, a big decision especially, I can measure your blood sugar before and after, and it will drop. It actually has a toll. So the morning is when we have the most mental ability to say yes to what we need to say yes to and no to everything else. The added benefit is that most other people are still looking at social media or lost in their inbox, and they're not going to be distracting you. Your kids are, we started working out originally at 5 a.m. This was 9 years ago. We started working out at 5 a.m. because we had small kids. And I wanted to be able to complete our workout before they were going to wake up, because I wanted to do it with my spouse, right? So we found time that, one, we could control. Two, there were very few distractions. Like, I loved watching Game of Thrones back then, but I sure as heck wasn't going to do it at 5 a.m. in the morning, right? So I'm not tempted to do a lot of things that I might be tempted to do at 9 p.m. So you have the mental energy to say yes, and you have far fewer distractions. And I'll tell you, most people aren't going to be highly aggressive at meeting with you at 8 a.m. in the morning. They want to meet you for lunch. It's very easy to say, I'm sorry, Stoyan, I already have a commitment. In fact, my calendar is booked from 8 o'clock till almost 11 o'clock in the morning. Is there any time in the afternoon that would work for you? And the key here is you never tell people that you're meeting with yourself. Just say you have a commitment. I have some firm commitments in my morning, but my afternoons are very easy to schedule. Can we look for a time in the afternoon? So it's not so much saying no, you're saying not now. It's very easy to push people later in the day. It's still the same day. You can push those priorities out and focus on your one thing. So there's tons of research. If you listen to Tim Ferriss's podcast or read Tools for Titans, like all of these amazing achievers, they're not talking about getting up at noon. They get up early because they know that there's few distractions and they focus on their things that matter to them, right? maybe they eat a healthy breakfast, or they journal, or they do yoga, or whatever it is, right? They take care of those other priorities. And then for me, I want to look at my calendar and I want to look at my goals before I look at my inbox or social media. I want to look at what did I say yes to before the world tries to get me to say yes to what they want me to say yes to. But those are a few strategies and some of the reasons why those morning hours are very, very precious.
And if we go back to the focus question, what's the one thing that will help you to wake up earlier? From my experience, it's go to bed earlier.
Yeah.
Like I know that some people are more naturally more like the night owls or whatever, like this research that backs it up. But again, you can always win maybe half an hour, 1 hour, and then it becomes a habit. And this is, I agree with you. It's, for me, morning is the best. Nobody's there to distract you.
Do you have daylight savings time where you are? Do y'all observe that, where you fall back and spring forward an hour over the year, or is that only in the United States?
I'm not sure.
Okay, then you probably don't. In the U.S., we have daylight savings. So in the fall, we get to sleep in an extra hour 1 day a year, right? Because
right. Got it.
We move the clocks so that you have more daylight. And one of the hacks is I tell people, if you're already getting up at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., when it comes time to switch the clocks, just keep getting up at the same time. So now you'll be getting up at 6 a.m. instead of 7 a.m. And you won't be sleep deprived at all because you're still getting up at the same time you normally get up. And every year, if you want, you can move that an hour, right? And so instead of getting knocked out of whack twice a year, get knocked out of whack once a year. But I would tell people, if you don't have the privilege of being in one of those time zones where they adjust the clocks, I think what you said is just start with 30 minutes. You know what? I'm just going to start getting up 30 minutes earlier. And I would encourage people, don't assign a task to that time. Give yourself a reward, right? I'm going to read my novel first thing in the morning, or I'm going to be able to catch up on my favorite podcast, or I'm going to do something that's inherently fun and pleasurable, right? Not work. So build the habit of waking up and then build the habit of using that time to do something productive. That would be the advice if people really struggle.
Yeah, beautiful, Jay. And this is going to be the final question. We have a question coming from the viewers. It's from Daria. You partly actually answer it, but it'll be interesting to see what else would you add to this. So Daria Naideno is asking, any tips on how to say no without feeling guilty or as if you are not doing your best?
Sure. At the end of the book, we have a section called the 4 Thieves of Productivity. And the number one thief is the inability to say no. And I know that I kind of divide the world into 2 kinds of people. There are people who are people-oriented and people who are task-oriented. I'm a little bit task-oriented, if I'm being honest. So I don't have a lot of trouble saying no because I'm focused on stuff. But my wife is very people-oriented. Right. So, and I work with salespeople around the world. So it's a very real thing. That's why it's number one. My encouragement would be just like with your kids. Like one of the things I learned as a parent, saying no all the time to your pets or your kids, it creates a lot of negative energy. It doesn't feel good to them and it doesn't feel good to you. What you want to do is say conditional yeses. So I try to make all of my yeses, I want to say yes as often as I can, and make it conditional, right? So I often will coach people on writing a book, but I have an hour-long video class they have to watch. I'll just say, look, it's a hidden video. If you will go watch this video, it may answer all of your questions, but if it doesn't, circle back and ask me a question. So every time someone asks me, I'm able to say yes. And I've been keeping track over the years, only about 1 in 7 people ever circles back. Almost everybody, either they get their answers or I've asked too much of them for them to actually feel good asking for the commitment. I know that it's a tripwire. I know that sometimes people who want, say, coach me on this, great, read this book, and then we'll talk about it. It's like a test, like yes, but with conditions. And that was kind of like earlier I role modeled, it's not a no, it's a not now. You know what? I'm really committed right now. Can we talk about this at a different time? And a lot of times the urgency someone feels is not present. You know what? I took care of it, but thank you. Like, they'll thank you for saying no if you learn to say it in ways that aren't no. Because you don't want to tell your team members, your boss, or your family, you're not my one thing. That doesn't go over very well for marriages, right? But it can be, it's not my one thing right now. Hey, can we do this later? So it's about navigating your time instead of just making everything a hard no. I will say this. I'm very good at saying no. It took you a long time to get on my calendar, right? And it was always a not now, right? This is not a good time. And we try to really manage that as best we can. But if someone asks me to do a partnership with them or do a project with them, one of the best ways I've learned to say no is, I would love to do this, but right now my existing commitments to my team members and my family are taking up all of my time. If I say yes to this, I won't do a good job. I'll either let you down or them down. So this is not a time that I could say yes, but I'm very flattered. And then I try to point them at an alternate resource. Have you thought about Stoyan? Have you thought about Daria? Right? I've heard that she's very interested in that. I would be happy to make an introduction. And those kind of favors take about 5 minutes of your time. And you're trying to get them to what they need if you're not able to be that thing. So there's just a few strategies for hopefully removing some of the guilt around saying no. It's because you're not really saying no. You're putting a conditional yes or a not now out there.
Jay, this has been such an enriching conversation. Thank you so much for actually making the time and being a guest of the podcast. I want to respect your time. And just before we wrap it up, would you maybe share with the audience where they can find you, learn more about the one thing, the wonderful retreats that you guys are making, and more about the resources that you have?
Thank you. We've mentioned it earlier. If people go to the one thing, everything we do is there, and there's a lot of free stuff. I love it when people buy our book or listen to our podcast, but they don't have to spend money. There's a lot of free resources. For the last 4 years, we've been hosting a goal-setting retreat. We have a virtual element to it, and we have people all over the world attend. I apologize. The time zones might not work for everyone. We had a couple in Israel with 4 kids attend last time, and they were up in the middle of the night. I felt so bad for 2 days, but they got a lot of benefit. The goal there is to give people a structure for setting long-term goals for themselves and their families and their teams that they can then walk out of 2 days with a GPS for their year, with 5-year goals, and a real plan for getting things done and clarity about what needs to be done. So that's a passion project. My wife and I have been doing that for 15 years now. And it's made such a big difference in our family because we both run businesses, and being able to be on the same page has been really important. So thank you for offering that. And, Jay Papasan, I'm easy to find online. I think I'm the only one in the world with that name. So I can't hide anywhere. So come find me if you need me.
Jay, thank you so much for everything. Guys, you got to do this thing. You got to go to the one thing. You got to get the book, check out the retreats. Thank you so much for everybody for listening, being with us. See you again at the next episode of Productivity Mastery.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stoyan.